Government officials insist that this is an isolated incident that 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 is we will continue to inform as this story unfolds. That's part of the bad
On behalf of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, the Black Press of America, we're so very pleased to welcome our next special guest, who's an authority in education. She is the interim CEO of Education Trust. And Education Trust is one of the nation's leading organizations that not only advocates for certain issues dealing with equality of education, the quality of education, quantity of education, but all education matters, and particularly for African Americans and other communities of color. There's no more important issue than public education today for our young people. So please welcome Denise Fort, the interim director, the interim CEO of Education Trust. Sister Fort, welcome.
Davis. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here and happy to talk with everyone.
Thank you, thank you. For our viewers, tell us a little bit about Education Trust, what its mission, and how long it's been around, and what it does.
We are closing in on almost 25 years with the Education Trust in DC. We have been active across a range of education policy issues and directly focused on closing opportunity gaps for students of color and students from low-income communities. And the way we believe that we can be effective in doing this is to provide research and data and bring that informed knowledge building to communities on the ground to help them to advocate for policy change at a statewide basis. And we're excited. We have a field of organizers, educators, civil rights activists, disability rights activists, from folks from the Latino community, children experiencing homelessness, all involved, including the business community, in making change on the ground. And these coalitions are active from New York to California and Texas to Washington State and more. Would love to have more people join us, and you can find out more information, of course, on our website.
Very good. Sister Ford, the American Rescue Plan, which is an act that's passed by Congress, $125 billion for education. And the vast majority of that funding, at least $109 billion, will go to local school districts. How does this affect, we represent the Black Press of America, so we have publishers all over the United States. So $109 billion going to local school districts. How can we make sure that Black, Latino, and other communities of color and low-income backgrounds are going to be the beneficiaries of these resources to try to close, as you described, the opportunity gap and the education gap?
The American Rescue Plan, as you mentioned, offers one of the largest investments in K through 12 education that we've seen in this country. And you have put your finger on it absolutely right. We need those funds to go to the communities who've been most impacted. And as we know, those are communities of color and low-income communities. Fortunately, one way we know that they are going to get those funds targeted right to the highest poverty school districts is because they're using a long-standing federal formula to help with that. But the other thing that's going to be incredibly important, that stakeholders on the ground, again, civil rights folks, educators, parents, come together, convene themselves, and directly press on their local school boards and state boards of education to say, what are the criteria you are going to use to make sure that once the dollars get to a school district, they go to the schools that are most in need. We are calling for robust stakeholder engagement. The federal law calls for robust stakeholder engagement, and our folks need to know about that. They should not be left out of the decision making on where those funds are going to go.
Thank you. That was a very good response. Across the country, how would you sum up where African American students are in the, there's a debate about whether or not during COVID, well, actually before COVID, we knew there was a big gap, opportunity gap, education gap. Now that we're beginning to come out of COVID, we're still not completely out, but what is your assessment for Black students, in particular in public schools across America?
Well, first things first, our community, being one of the most under-resourced communities, was already facing systemic challenges that we have in pockets been able to overcome, because I don't want to dismiss some of the hard work that is going into many schools every day where they have a high percentage of Black students, because we know there are many schools that are thriving. And I actually would love to just highlight a wonderful podcast that our friend Karen Chenoweth, who is our writer in residence at the Education Trust, called Extraordinary Schools in Extraordinary Times, where she lifts up those schools who have a majority of students of color, majority of students from poverty, and shows, when you have the right factors in place, it can be done. But to your question, we know from the research that the cost to our students in general has been about losing 7 months of learning, or in what we like to call, we don't call it learning loss at the Education Trust, we call it unfinished learning, because there's still some learning that has gone on, more needs to be done, but we don't want to put that on the student, because ultimately it's the systems that have made that happen. So an average of 7 months, but for our Latino friends, 9 months, and our Black students, 10 months. So the question then becomes, how do we accelerate learning? And in many instances, the research is out there, what works well for our students in terms of accelerating that learning. We just have to make sure that our school systems and communities are ready and have a plan to do that.
We've heard that parental involvement is so important with students' education. Can you talk about, I know you have 2 sons, but as a parent, as a mother, and as an educator, how important is it for parents to be involved, particularly now in 2021, as we look toward 2022, parental environment, particularly from an African American perspective?
Oh, 100%. The first thing is, I think more of us have had exposure to what our students were experiencing in their classroom, because of remote learning. Our students were at home, my 2 boys. I felt like I was in the classroom every day, all day, being able to interact and see how my students were interfacing with their other friends, but mostly with their teachers and the other support systems. And we also know that a good proportion of our community is not prepared to go back into a school system where the school's climate is not supportive of them. And I think that tension is still there. And we are really hoping that parents can raise their voices, and they're doing this in different places, to demand from, again, school leaders, because these are the ones that are making these decisions, that we're not going to go back into classrooms where, you were policing our children in their minds, spirits, and intellect. That should not happen in whatever the next classroom generation looks like. But when kids go back to school in the fall, we do need to have stronger parental engagement, but also more wraparound supports for our students and teachers who, experienced the pandemic and loss in the exact same ways as our communities. But yes, parental engagement is critically important at this time. And we are seeing more communities of parents get really active and show up at their school board meetings, show up demanding what is absolutely entitled for their children.
Very good. Our program on education at the NMPA is supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And so one of the things I want to ask you about the digital divide, the role that technology is playing in education, both from pre-K to 12, but also in undergraduate education, but specifically pre-K through 12. What is the role of technology and how important it is for all families to have greater access to broadband?
Wow, this past year has shown us how important technology is, access to technology and the quality of it, both in making sure that our kids had access to their teachers and friends, but also access to the information. The facts are that we've had real deserts of opportunity when it comes to the digital divide in communities of color. Deserts, not only in access, but like access to a device, but access to the internet. And so over this past year, as we've been able to look at a number of communities that are doing the right thing, everything from putting school buses in a neighborhood that had hotspots on them. DC did a great job. I resided in Capitol, of delivering devices or making sure they had devices for every student. There's other communities that are doing that as well. But we do know that 25% of all Black households lacked internet access, high-speed internet access. And so we have to continue to improve that area, because for sure, as our students return to school in what is a classroom setting, many school districts are already having them bring their computers with them, and we're going to see more of that. I think two things we should continue to press on. One, there's already $7 billion that came out of the American Rescue Plan to help school districts and libraries increase their access to the internet and provide devices. So we want to make sure all schools are tapping into that resource. There's a similar benefit for students in college that they should also access. But two, we need to make sure that whatever learning is going on is of high quality and culturally responsive. The same thing that we would apply to the regular curriculum, we need to be able to apply to what's being delivered with technology. And that's really important, going to be more important that we keep our eyes focused on that. The fight to close the digital divide cannot stop just because the pandemic's over.
Very good.
Easy.
Sister Ford, there's a current debate among educators, but also among some state legislatures are dictating to school systems what you can teach, what you cannot teach, or should you tell young people about slavery, or no, you shouldn't tell them about slavery. What's your feeling about the quality and the academic credibility of the educational prospects going forward?
We are very concerned about what is the latest culture war against our communities, the latest attempt to restrict learning, the latest attempt to erase race, which in a democracy feels 180 degrees backwards, that we should be trying to restrict learning, restrict intellectual conversation. I really compare it to the policing that goes on in education. Another opportunity to police our students' minds and bodies by restricting their opportunity to engage in really robust learning. It is another culture war. We've seen them before. We've seen this before, and I don't believe this one will have any different kind of result in the end. But I really encourage educators. They've been doing a great job in a number of states of really lifting their voices. And, you know, they are the ones in the classroom, not the policymakers. They are the ones rising up before 7 in the morning to prepare for their day. They are the ones that are trying to deliver the most rigorous, academically sound, and provocative at times historical background. But this idea that we can leave things out because they make folks uncomfortable, I don't think that's how this country is supposed to operate.
Very good. Words of wisdom and words of experience. Thank you so much. But before we end the interview, I would like to give you an opportunity from your perspective at Education Trust. What are the 3 most important things that you think that African Americans, particularly the Black press, and all of our viewers need to focus on going forward as we move hopefully out of the pandemic? What are the 3 things that we need to really prioritize to improve the delivery and the quality of education that African Americans and other communities of color should be receiving in America?
I love that question. Thank you for asking. 3 things. 1, hold folks accountable for this American Rescue Plan spending. We don't quite have the full amount of transparency that we believe that communities of color need to have to know how those dollars are being spent and what they're being spent on. We know the evidence tells us that if you're going to accelerate learning, look at 3 things: building strong relationships for kids, intensive tutoring, small groups, aligned with the curriculum with experienced or trained educators, and extending the school day. So those are the things we know, and we need to make sure that our schools are focused on delivering those results. The second thing I would argue is we also know that these new infusion of funds can present tremendous opportunity, but not if they're going to only focused on the communities that already have the assets, right? That already have the advantages. We need to make sure, again, by holding our policymakers accountable, that the funds are going to the communities that need it most, by emphasizing that they need to be crystal clear on what the measures are for how they're going to identify those communities. So that's 2. And 3, as we look ahead, let's remember the trauma that our communities have experienced over the past year. It's not just the health pandemic, but unemployment, loss of lives, and then the racial reckoning. That is trauma that our communities lived with probably more deeply than others, I might say. But we need to acknowledge that and support it, and not just for our students, but for our educators, with making sure that they have the supports, these wraparound supports, school counselors, school nurses, school psychiatrists, making sure that the community-based organizations are supported because they've worked closely with these students and families already, and making sure that our teachers are supported. So those are the 3 things that I would really encourage our folks in the press to really focus on over the next couple of years. We are going to need you to help lift up what is usually covered up, and only you through really thoughtful inquiry can do that. So we appreciate that in many ways.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to assure you that the Black Press of America, the Indian paper, will continue to work directly with you and Education Trust. And best wishes to you as the new interim CEO of
Thank you so
Education
much.
Trust.
Thank you so much. Have a
God
great
bless.
day.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Best wishes.